Hi everyone. For those just joining, we are now going over the facility information sheet of the Emission Reduction Credit, or ERC, Generation General Workbook. This sheet is for information regarding the facilities included in the application, the type of equipment each facility is, the applicable pollutant or pollutants, and what the facility's reduction date is. Rows 8 and 10 will provide instruction on what the TCEQ considers the reduction date, based on the reduction strategy or strategies chosen on the previous general sheet. As you can see, there is currently only one reduction strategy. The other is grayed out for now. For facilities that are being permanently shut down, the reduction date will be the last date the facility emitted or will emit air pollution to the airshed. Moving down past the instructions sheet, we come to a small section on site information. Because we indicated on the previous sheet that at least one of the fins included in this project is subject to at least one of the cap-and-trade programs, we can now specify if it's MECT, HECT, or both. Depending on the selection here, different columns will appear under the MECT and HECT section of the facility information table below in columns I and J. If we select MECT, then only the MECT column will be available for input. And it's the same with selecting HECT. For our project, though, we will select both, and we can see that the MECT and HECT columns are now available to us. Now in this first example, the site is an oil and gas production site where the full site is being permanently shut down. So first, we'll enter the last date that the production from the well was reported to the Railroad Commission. If more than one well was plugged, enter the last date of production for the most recently plugged well. We're using June 5th, 2023. In this example. Next, select whether or not the well or wells have been plugged. We'll select yes. Finally, enter the date the well was plugged according to the Railroad Commission W3 form. If there is more than one well, enter the most recent plugging date. If the well or wells have not been plugged, enter the anticipated plugging date. We'll use June 1st, 2024. The next row will display whether the site qualifies for the 72-month oil and gas incentive based on the two dates entered above, in accordance with TAC 101-303 D1C. This incentive provides an additional 12 months of useful life to the ERC's typical 60-month expiration date. Additionally, the reduction date will be set as the most recent well plugging date. If the project qualifies for the incentive, the four questions regarding the reduction date in the table below will gray out and not need to be addressed, as the reduction date will be the well plugging date. If the project does not qualify, then the applicant should answer those questions, and we will see how that changes the calculated reduction date here in just a minute. In scenario 1, we're using June 5th, 2023 in cell B28 for the last date of production, and June 1st, 2024 in cell B30 for the well plugging date. In this scenario, the company would qualify for the incentive. If we look at the facility information table below, we'll see the questions regarding the reduction date are grayed out, and the calculated reduction date is auto-populated, and is the same date as the well plugging date entered into cell B30. In scenario 2, we'll change the well plugging date to exceed 1 year from the last date of production. When we change B30 to June 10th, 2024, we see that, based on the dates provided above, the site does not qualify. The questions regarding the reduction date in the table below will need to be answered in order to determine the reduction date. Beginning on row 34, the applicant must enter the facility information. However, I have already pre-entered 4 facilities. We will start with the FIN and EPN. Then we will select the equipment type. If Other is selected, enter a brief description limited to 200 characters. Select the appropriate pollutant and cap and trade applicability. The cap and trade section will only appear if it was indicated on the general sheet that one or more fins are subject to the MECT and/or HECT programs. Next, we will select the reduction strategy. Let's return to the pollutant section of the table to see how the pollutant options will change based on the county selected on the general sheet. For example, if we change the county to Anderson, we'll see that SO2 will be our only pollutant option. And if we change the county to El Paso, we'll see that PM10 will be our only pollutant option. However, let's change it back to our original selection of Brazoria County to continue with our example. Let's add one more facility to the table, FIN 555. Let's see how the workbook responds when we select Other as the equipment type. We'll see how the cell to the right opens up so we can enter a description of the equipment. But we'll actually select Process Heater for this facility. For the pollutant type, we'll select Yes to both VOC and NOx. And for the cap and trade applicability, we'll select Yes for MECT and No for HECT. Depending on our selection here, we'll see a cap and trade note letting us know if we need to retire any MECT and/or HECT allowances. Then we'll select our reduction strategy of a permanent shutdown of full site. As I mentioned earlier, if the site qualifies for the 72-month oil and gas incentive, the questions in the reduction date section do not need to be addressed. If the site does not qualify, please enter a date for each question. If the date is unknown, enter NA for not applicable. For accurate determination of your reduction date, at least one question must have a date response. These questions are intended to guide the user on how to determine the reduction date. Let's enter some dates for FIN 555. We'll enter June 5th, 2023 for question 1, June 6th, 2023 for question 2, June 5th, 2023 for question 3, and June 5th, 2023 for question 4. A calculated reduction date will appear in column U based on the answers to the previous questions on this sheet. Select whether or not you agree with this date in column V, and if not, please provide the date you believe is appropriate and the justification for this date. Let's look at how the calculated reduction date changes based on if the project qualifies for the 72-month oil and gas incentive. The final column in this table, column X, will calculate the last date the ERC application can be submitted to the TCEQ based on the calculated reduction date. If the submission deadline has passed, a message will display denoting this. In our current example, the site does not qualify for the incentive, so the reduction date and submissions deadlines are dependent upon the responses to the questions in the table. However, if we use the dates from our previous scenario, where B28 equals June 5th, 2023, and B30 equals June 1st, 2024, we can see the well plugging date is also the calculated reduction date, and the last date to submit the application will be June 1st, 2026. The deadline has not yet passed. Now remember in the general sheet video, when I said we would come back to the large grayed out area under the reduction strategy on the previous sheet? We're about to go back to the general sheet and change our reduction strategy and add an additional one. But first, because we are changing the strategy from permanent shutdown of full site to a different reduction strategy, the site is no longer eligible to qualify for the 72-month oil and gas incentive, and we will need to delete the entries in cells B28, 29, and 30. Now that we're back at the reduction strategy selection on the general sheet, let's change the first strategy to Other Method that is approved by the Executive Director, which will open up some more cells. A description of the strategy is needed with a 200-character limit. Next, depending on whether or not the Executive Director has approved this proposed reduction strategy, one of two messages will appear. If you have not received approval and answer no, please contact the EBT team to set up a pre-application meeting to discuss the project and the proposed reduction strategy. You will need to acquire Executive Director approval before the project can be submitted. If you have received prior approval, select Yes and include a copy of the written approval from the Executive Director. Next, we'll select whether the reduction strategy just entered is used by all the fins included in this application. If Yes is selected, then no further action is needed on this page. But for our example, we are going to enter a second reduction strategy and select No. For our second reduction strategy, we'll select permanent shutdown of partial site in this case. Now we can move back to the facility information sheet and see how things have changed. We see that there are now two reduction strategies displayed in rows 8 and 10. The section covering the full permanent shutdown of oil and gas production site is no longer available. And now we have two reduction strategies to choose from in the drop-down menu in column L. Make sure all applicable facilities have been entered correctly in the table. The workbook currently has a 50 fin capacity. If your site has more than 50 fins, please fill out an additional workbook.